With all the leadership books, podcasts, TED Talks, and everything else about leadership these days, is there even room to talk about godly leadership? Today on Called to Lead, why does godly leadership still matter in 2025? Welcome to the Called to Lead podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to look at why godly leadership still matters in 2025. And I think it matters every year. I think it matters all the time. But we're going to kind of talk about that because it's a big hot topic. There are a lot of books. I know in our fire department, our chief buys certain books and he'll put them at the stations. He'll kind of almost put them like in a little station library where we can have different books we can read on leadership. There's leadership conferences. There's leadership seminars, leadership camps, anything you could think of about leadership. But it's still one of the places that people struggle in the most in their lives. Leading in their churches, leading at homes, leading in business, leading in their communities, leading in our country. It's an area that people still struggle with greatly. And so we're going to talk about why godly leadership still matters in 2025. You know, I had a captain at the fire department that retired a while ago. And I asked him one time, I said, why did you never promote further than captain? He was towards the end of his career. And I said, you've been a captain a long time. You're very intelligent. You're very well respected. You could do that job. And people would think that you're great at it. Like you would be great, but people would even think that you're great at it, which aren't always the same things. But I was like, you would do well and they would think you're doing well. And I think you could have really made an impact if you decided to do that. And he said something interesting. He said, I've thought about it, but I really think I can make more of an impact here as a station officer, where I have a close relationship with these 4 or 5 guys. I can know these 4 or 5 guys. I can influence them in a way where they can go and impact their families and others. And if I was doing that for the whole organization, I wouldn't have that type of influence because I wouldn't have that type of relationship. I wouldn't have time to. And it really spoke to me because that's kind of what we see in Jesus is we see that he collected 12 men to invest in, and he spoke to the crowds, sure, but he couldn't invest in them as much because it was just too big of a crowd. He picked that smaller group to invest in. And what it showed me about that captain is that he acknowledged that he probably would do well in that position, but he made a choice. He chose not to care about his personal ambition, but he cared more about godly principles and about making an impact that would last beyond him. And I think that's important for leadership. And I think that's why godly leadership still matters in 2025. So we're going to look at 3 different reasons why I think it matters in 2025. The first reason is this: godly leadership is anchored in truth. Listen, the culture around us changes. And if you've been around for a while, some of us are maybe a little older than others, but you've seen that. You've seen how culture has changed. The culture in the firehouse has changed in the 15 or so years I've been there. The culture has changed. The people that we hire are a little bit different than the people that came before. We do things differently. But that's important to acknowledge that all scripture is God-breathed. That's why we trust it. We trust it because it's God's word. Not because it's ours, not because we like it, not because it goes against our culture or whatever. We trust it because it's God. It's his word spoken to us. And John 14:6, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And the word truth is capitalized because it's not just an abstract fact about him. He's claiming that as a title, as a name. He is the truth. And so when we look at his word, we know that it's true because it's him. So leaders need to ground their decision-making and their vision casting in biblical truth, not in popularity. Popularity comes and goes. And to be honest, sometimes standing for the truth, we've seen this recently, standing for the truth is not always popular. When we look at Acts chapter 7 and we see Stephen, who was preaching, the religious leaders were totally fine with his message when he was talking about the Old Testament. But the moment at the very end of his message in Acts chapter 7, I encourage you to go read it, where he talks about Jesus being God, Jesus being the Son of God, Jesus being God in the flesh. That's the moment that they couldn't take anymore. Well, why? Because the culture didn't want to hear the truth. And sometimes the culture doesn't want to hear the truth. But that doesn't relieve us from the responsibility of sharing it and of standing on it and standing firm in it. So we have to be anchored in the truth. Godly leadership is anchored in the truth. The second thing, godly leadership models servanthood. So worldly leadership is mainly about power and about prestige, where godly leadership is about service and sacrifice. They're 2 totally different mindsets, 2 totally different ideas. So Jesus, when he washes the disciples' feet in John chapter 13, that's the ultimate leadership moment. for Jesus, because it's the moment, other than the cross, other than the crucifixion, this moment is the moment where he's teaching his disciples the most about being a servant leader. And in their culture, it was the absolute most unexpected thing that he should have done, because the rabbi, the master, the leader is not the person to do that. The head servant doesn't do that. The rookie lowest servant would be the person who would do that, who would wash the feet. But Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, and he says pretty much that he's doing that to show them what leadership is, to show them how to serve one another when he's gone. So real leadership is about servanthood. It's about serving the people that you're placed in charge of. I've known several people over the years in the fire service and in ministry at the church who modeled this. But one of the greatest models of this that I can think of are my friends Grady and Cynthia. Grady and Cynthia, about 8 or 9 years ago, I've been the youth pastor at this church for a while. And the first 4 or 5 years, I didn't do youth. I did some other ministry responsibilities. And then about 10 years ago, I started doing youth. And about 8 or 9 years ago, our group really started growing. We started off with about 6 kids. And now we've grown to, I don't know, maybe 60 or so. We had about 60 last night on Wednesday night. But as we were growing, I needed some help. I needed some people to come in and start helping. I needed to split off some of our Bible study time because the group was getting too big, and I needed some more eyes and ears to help. And so I put a plea out to the church. Hey, I need help. I need some people to come help me. The first people that signed up were a couple whose kids were all grown. They were adults. They didn't have any incentive to be there. It wasn't like they wanted to come spend time with their kids. It wasn't because they're trying to live vicariously through the youth. It was just because they wanted to serve. And they'll be the first to tell you that serving in this way with teenagers sometimes wears them out. It sometimes makes them tired. They've been fostering, and they recently took in a toddler, and that takes up a lot of Cynthia's time now. But Grady is still consistent. He was there last night. He'll be there teaching on Sunday morning. And it's not because it's his gift. It's not because he is guilted into doing it. It's because when there was a need, he met the need. That's what servant leadership is. When you see the need, you meet it when you can. And that's what they've done. And I'm so thankful for them. The interesting thing about Grady especially is he's never told me no. Hey, can you drive the van? Yep. Can you drive the bus? Yep. Can you pick kids up from here? Yep. Can you go to camp with us? Yep. For a week? Yep. Can you help cook at camp? Yep. He always says yes. And a servant leader, when they can meet the need, they meet it. That's what they do. It's a great example of being a servant leader. So I want to challenge you to pick an area of servant leadership, an area that you can serve someone else. Now, that could be in your home with your spouse or your kids or your parents, whoever you live with. That could be at work or at school if you're a student. That could be in your church, wherever it is. I want you to think of something you can do to actively serve someone else, to put yourself last and them first. It could be a big thing, or it could be as small as doing the dishes and taking out the trash, anything. But what I want you to do is I want you to comment in the comments here, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Comment on the comments down below and tell us what you're going to do. Because there's something about when you say something out loud, there's some accountability attached to that. You could say in your mind, oh, I think I'll do this. But nobody hears it. Nobody knows it. But something about writing it down or saying it out loud makes you more likely to follow through. So put that in the comments. I want to be able to hold you accountable to that. And I also want to be able to pray for you in that. So if you would comment down below about what you're going to do this week to serve somebody else. The third thing, godly leadership offers hope in the chaos. Today's world is filled with a lot of crazy things, a lot of uncertainty in politics and the economy, social issues, social pressures. But a godly leader can create stability in those things, not because they're perfect, but because they trust God. In 2 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind." And it's really difficult sometimes when a situation is chaotic or things are going crazy all around you to remain calm and to just use your brain and think. And some people think, well, that's a gift, that's whatever. And maybe it is, but it's something that leaders can learn how to do, especially when they're grounded in the truth of God's word. So we had a call one time several years ago where I was on the ambulance at the time, a firefighter riding on the ambulance, and we had a call where the police were out. There was a veteran who was suicidal, and he was boarded up in his house. His wife and daughter were there. And, they roped off the area. Every cop in town was there. We were staged nearby in case the worst case scenario happened. And after talking down for a while, he let his family go and he put his weapon down and came out to the front porch. And neighbors were all around. And he came and he sat down, and they kind of had a negotiator talking with him, and ended up getting him to the back of the ambulance, and they're talking, and he says, "I'm not going with y'all. I'm not going with y'all." And they're like, "Well, you got to go with them, or we're going to have to handcuff you and take you in the police car. We don't want to do that in front of your wife and daughter. We don't want to do that in front of your neighbors. Just go with the ambulance crew." And he did not want to do that. So he refused to talk to any of us. He didn't want to do that. So our battalion chief at the time was running incident command, and he called and said, "Hey, we need you up here right now." "Yes, sir." So I come, I'm thinking it's a medical emergency. I show up, and he says, but he knows I'm a pastor as well. And he says, "Hey, this guy's a veteran, young. He has a family." Tells me the whole situation. And he says, "Here's what we need you to do. We need you to convince him to go to the hospital with us so he can get the help he needs." Okay, no problem. So I go in there and I say, "Hey, go with us, buddy." He's like, "Not going with y'all. Not doing it." And he's big, he's muscled up, he's strong, and I recognize him. I'd seen him in the gym before working out. And I'm not a genius. I don't even think I'm really smart. But I think God in that moment gave me the words to say. And I said, "Hey, you're really, I can tell you work out. I think I've seen you at the gym." And he said, "Yeah, I think I've seen you too. Just real dry." And I said, "Okay, well, I know that you care about service because you served your country. And I thank you for serving." And he said, "Yeah, look what it got me." Because he's, has some issues. And I said, "Well, I want you to know that I appreciate you." I said, "Can I ask you one more thing?" I said, "I know you're a servant. I know you care about serving." I said, "Can I ask you to serve one more time?" And he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need you to serve your wife and daughter." I said, "I need you to serve them by getting help." I said, "I need you to serve your neighbors by going with us." I said, "And I need you to serve these police officers who care about you, who respect your service as a veteran. And the last thing they want to do is handcuff you and take you to the hospital and then to jail in front of all your neighbors. They don't want that." I said, "You could do an act of service right now to them, to all of those people, if you'll let us take you to the hospital." And he said, "I'm in." And we went to the hospital. Now, I don't claim credit for that because I think God gave me those words to say. But the thing is that when we spend time with him and when we're close to him, he'll do that. And we can bring peace in chaos. And God calls us to do that. Leaders need to be steady. They need to be a hopeful presence in their families, in their workplaces, and in their churches. So to recap all of this, the 3 points, the 3 reasons why godly leadership is still vital, still matters, even in 2025, in our culture today: truth, servanthood, and hope. We can offer those things to people around us. When we stand firm in the truth, when we're willing to be a servant, we'll bring hope to people that sometimes desperately need it. Leadership is tough. When it's rooted in God, it makes all the difference. So here's the question. Where can we lead more like Jesus this week? Where's a place where we can plug in, we can serve, and we can lead like him this week? Remember to comment down below the place you're going to serve, the way you're going to serve your wife, your church, your job, whoever it is this week. Let's hold each other accountable on that. Pray for each other in that. If you would, subscribe, like, and share so more people can hear this content. We'll see you next time on Call to Lead.